What if the desert did not keep its dead by accident? What if the quiet bodies found beneath ancient sand were not only burials, not only remains of a vanished people, but the last traces of a belief so old that even the wind forgot its name? Imagine a desert before sunrise. The dunes are still blue in the half-light. The air is cold. Nothing moves except a thin veil of sand sliding softly over the ground, covering old footprints as if the earth itself is trying to erase a memory. Somewhere beneath those dunes, according to an old legend, there once lived a god. Not a god of temples and golden statues. Not a god who spoke from clouds. But a god of drought, silence, hunger, fertility, wind, and buried things. A god the people did not love. A god they feared. A god they believed had to be fed. And in the oldest version of the legend, when the dry season came and the wells grew low, a forgotten desert tribe chose 10 people to be given back to the sand. This story is not presented as proven history. It belongs to the shadowed border between legend, possible memory, archaeological mystery, and human imagination. It may preserve a distorted echo of burial customs. It may reflect the fear of drought. It may be a later story created around strange bodies preserved by the desert. Or it may be a symbolic tale about what people believed survival demanded when the land itself seemed alive. But the question remains. Why would any ancient people believe the desert demanded human lives? And what truth might still be sleeping beneath the sand? To enter this mystery, we have to begin with the desert itself. Not the desert of maps. Not the desert seen from far away as empty space. But the desert as a living world. A place of heat by day and cold by night. A place where water is memory. A place where the horizon trembles in silence, and a person can walk for hours towards something that vanishes as they approach. Imagine a small settlement near the edge of such a land. It stands where the dunes soften into rocky ground, where dry riverbeds curve like pale scars through the plain, and where a few wells sink deep into hidden water. The houses are low and simple, built from stone, mud, reed, and whatever the land allows. Some shelters lean against natural rock. Others stand near fragile fields that depend on rare rain and careful hands. In the distance, the dunes rise like sleeping animals. Beyond them lies the open desert. The people do not think of it as empty. No one who lives beside the desert truly thinks it is empty. They know it has moods. They know its winds. They know the places where thorn trees cling to life, where water might gather after a storm, where stones hold the last warmth of sunset, where an animal trail can lead toward a hidden spring or away into deathly silence. They know that the desert can give. It gives salt, stone, shelter, paths between distant places. It gives visions at dawn, when the light makes the dunes look like waves. It gives rare flowers after rain, sudden and brief, glowing for a few days before the heat returns. It gives life. But it also takes. It takes tracks. It takes houses if the dunes move too close. It takes wells when the underground water sinks. It takes animals when grazing fails. It takes fields when rain does not come. And sometimes, it takes people who wander too far. For a tribe living in such a world, survival would not feel like ownership of the land. It would feel like negotiation. Every year, they would watch the sky. Every morning, someone would look toward the wells. Every season, elders would remember the years of rain and the years of hunger. A cloud on the horizon could become a promise. A dry wind could become a warning. A crack in the field could become a message. In this kind of world, belief does not grow separately from survival. It grows from it. When the riverbed stays dry too long, people ask why. When the well gives less water than before, people ask what has changed. When the fields fail, when animals weaken, when the wind covers a path that everyone remembers, the human mind searches for meaning. Not because ancient people were foolish. but because human beings have always needed the world to answer them. A storm can be survived more easily than silence. And the desert is full of silence. According to the legend, the tribe believed that silence had a name. They called it the sand god. We do not know if such a name was ever spoken by a real people, or if later storytellers shaped the figure from many older desert fears. But within the legend, the sand god was not imagined like a man with a crown or a beast beneath the earth. It was larger than a form, older than a face. It lived under dunes, in dry wells, in the white glare of noon, in the wind that erased footsteps, in the dust that entered sealed rooms, in the hunger that came when the land gave nothing back. It was the desert itself, made sacred and feared. In some tellings, the god slept beneath the deepest dune. In others, it moved slowly underground, like thirst moving through the body of the earth. Some said it heard every footstep crossing the sand. Some said it counted every seed planted near its edge. Some said the dunes rose and fell because the god was breathing. And when the dry season came, the people listened for that breath. The settlement lived between two worlds. Behind it were the wells, the fields, the animals, the cooking fires, the places where people sang at night, the stones where elders sat, the small storehouses where grain was guarded like treasure. Before it was the desert. A vast and patient presence. At dawn, the line between the village and the sand seemed gentle. Light moved softly over the roofs. Women carried water jars. Men checked tools and animals. Children stayed close to the shade. Smoke rose from hearths. The fields, if there had been rain, glimmered faintly with green. But by afternoon, the difference became sharper. Heat pressed down. The earth cracked. The wind moved grains of sand across thresholds. The far dunes glowed like metal. And the desert seemed closer. The tribe, according to the legend, believed the world had to remain in balance. Nothing could be taken without being returned. If people drew water from the hidden veins of the earth, something had to be offered. If they planted seeds at the desert's edge, something had to be given back to the sand. If rain came after prayer, gratitude had to be shown. If rain did not come, perhaps the balance had been broken. This is a pattern found in many ancient belief systems, though expressed in countless different forms. People living close to the limits of survival often developed rituals around rain, fertility, harvest, drought, and protection. These rituals could be symbolic, communal, devotional, or political. They were ways of turning fear into action, and uncertainty into a form that could be carried together. But the legend of the sand god takes this idea into darker territory. It says that the tribe believed the desert did not accept ordinary gifts forever. Clay bowls could be offered. Grain could be buried. Milk could be poured into dry ground. Songs could be sung at dusk. White cloth could be tied to thorn branches. Small stones could be arranged in circles beneath the stars. But in the driest years, when the wells receded and the animals cried in the night, the elders believed the sand asked for more. Not because the god was cruel in a simple way. Not because the story was meant to frighten children. But because the desert, in the legend, represented the terrifying truth that life sometimes seemed to survive only by loss. The tribe looked at the land and saw a bargain. If the sand received nothing, it would take everything. That was the belief. That was the fear. And perhaps, if this legend grew from real drought memories, it tells us something about the emotional world of people who lived where one failed season could threaten the entire community. Imagine one of those years. The rains are late. The riverbed is pale and empty. The wind lifts dust from the cracks in the fields. Animals stand close to the shade, thin and quiet. At the wells, people wait longer than before, lowering vessels into darkness and listening for the sound of water far below. The rope goes down. The vessel touches stone. Then, at last, a little water. Not enough. Never enough. The people speak softly now. They do not waste words in the heat. At night, when the stars come out, the settlement gathers in patches of firelight. The flames are small, guarded carefully. Faces appear and disappear in the glow. Elders sit close together, wrapped in pale cloth. The young listen, not because they are commanded, but because everyone can feel the same question moving through the village. What if the rain does not return? In a modern historical explanation, we might speak of climate stress, drought cycles, ecological pressure, resource scarcity, and social tension. But the legend does not speak that way. The legend says the sand god had turned its face away. And so the people began to prepare. Their preparation was quiet. That is what makes the story linger. No thunder. No shouting. No monstrous sign in the sky. Only small human actions beneath a vast desert night. Clay bowls were shaped and left to dry. White cloth was woven or washed clean. The old sand circles beyond the last houses were swept clear. Torches were made for dusk. Elders watched the moon. The wells were measured. The wind was listened to. And every household began to understand what season had arrived. The season of asking. The season of fear. The season when the tribe remembered the oldest bargain. This is where we must keep the story careful. The legend says that each year, when the dry season deepened, 10 people were chosen for the sand. It does not tell the story as a scene of horror. It tells it as ritual, solemn and symbolic, bound inside a belief system where the survival of the many was imagined to depend on the offering of the few. Whether anything like this ever happened cannot be claimed without evidence. It may be pure legend. It may be a memory distorted across centuries. It may be a later explanation for bodies preserved naturally in desert conditions. It may be an outsider's misunderstanding of a burial tradition. Or it may be the kind of story human beings create when faced with the most frightening question of all. What does survival cost? The people in the legend believed they already knew the answer. They believed the sand had to receive life so that life could continue. They believed the offering called rain. They believed it opened the wells. They believed it softened anger inside the tribe. They believed it calmed hunger, protected the fields, and kept the desert from crossing fully into the place of the living. This belief would have made the ritual both feared and sacred. No one would speak of it casually. No one would laugh near the circles of sand. No one would step carelessly over the old boundary stones. Because in the legend, the place of offering was not outside the world. It was where the human world touched the desert's mouth. There, beyond the last shelter, the ground became pale and open. The dunes leaned close. The wind moved in thin lines. At dusk, shadows stretched long across the sand, and the village behind seemed small, almost temporary. The elders said the god was listening. The people believed them. Or perhaps some doubted. There are always doubters, even in legends. Perhaps a young person looked at the sky and saw only weather. Perhaps a mother looked at the wells and thought only of stone and water. Perhaps a traveler passing through wondered if the sand god was not a god at all, but a name given to fear. But doubt is difficult in a hungry year. When the rain fails, fear becomes persuasive. When fields crack, old stories sound wiser. When animals grow quiet and wells deepen into darkness, even the skeptical may begin to listen for something beneath the dunes. This is how belief strengthens. Not because every person is certain, but because uncertainty itself becomes unbearable. A ritual gives shape to fear. A god gives a face to drought. An offering gives people something to do when doing nothing feels impossible. And so, in the legend, the tribe waited for the dry season. The days became brighter. The nights became colder. The stars sharpened over the desert like small white stones scattered across black cloth. The last green faded at the edges of the fields. The wells lowered. The wind came more often from the open sand. Then, one evening, as the sun sank behind the dunes and turned the whole desert the color of old copper, the elders walked beyond the last houses. They carried clay bowls. They carried white cloth. They carried the memory of every year before. And behind them, the settlement grew quiet. The people knew what would come next. When the dry season came, 10 names would be chosen for the sand. When the 10 names were chosen, the village did not become loud. It became still. According to the legend, the choosing was not treated as punishment, nor as an act of anger, nor as a moment of spectacle. It belonged to an older and quieter fear. The fear that the desert was watching. The fear that if the balance failed, the dunes would move closer, the wells would sink into darkness, and the fields would return to dust. So the people lowered their voices. They covered fires before the wind could scatter sparks. They washed clay bowls in the last clean water. They swept the sand circles beyond the settlement until each line was smooth again. And as evening came, they waited for the elders to speak. The old ritual place lay beyond the final houses. Not far. Just far enough that the village could still be seen behind it, small and fragile, with thin smoke rising from hearths and dark figures standing near doorways. Beyond the ritual place, the desert opened. Dunes rolled away into copper light. A dry wind crossed the ground in long soft breaths. The boundary stones stood half-buried, each one touched by many seasons of sand. No one could say how long they had been there. In the legend, they were older than the oldest memory. Older than the wells. Older than the fields. Older, perhaps, than the tribe itself. At dusk, white cloth was brought out. It moved gently in the wind, pale against the darkening earth. Some pieces were folded. Some were tied to wooden poles. Some were laid beside clay bowls filled with grain, salt, milk, water, and little seeds saved from the last good harvest. The white cloth did not make the scene peaceful. It made it solemn. It gave shape to what the people could barely speak. Torches were lit as the sun lowered. Not many. Just enough for the ritual circle to glow while the desert around it deepened into blue shadow. The flame moved across faces. Elders. Families. Travelers who had stayed too long and now stood at the edge of the gathering. Young adults looking down at their hands. Old women murmuring prayers that sounded less like words and more like breath. Somewhere in the distance, drums began. Slowly. Not a rhythm for war. Not a rhythm for celebration. A heartbeat beneath the evening. One sound. Then silence. Then another. The people believed the sand god heard through the ground. They believed the dunes listened better than the sky. So the drums were not loud. They were low. Deep. Soft enough to enter the body before the mind could resist them. The elders stepped into the sand circle. In the legend, their robes were the color of ash and clay. Their hair was covered. Their hands carried no weapons. Only bowls, cords, dust, and signs traced in sand. One elder knelt and placed a palm against the ground. Another lifted a clay bowl toward the first stars. Another spoke the names of the wells. Not the names of people yet. The names of water. The deep well. The bitter well. The mother well. The well that had failed once and returned. The well where the first settlement was said to have begun. The names were spoken slowly, because names were a form of keeping. A thing named was a thing remembered. A thing remembered was not yet lost. Then the elders named the fields. The small field near the stones. The field where barley had grown in the year of 3 rains. The field that cracked first in drought. The field that belonged to the widows. The field no one planted anymore because the sand had crossed it. One by one, the village was gathered into words. The wells. The fields. The animals. The dead. The unborn seasons. The roofs. The stored grain. The paths through the dry riverbed. The children sleeping in shaded rooms. The old ones waiting through another year. The people did not believe the offering was only for rain. They believed it was for everything. For peace within the tribe. For water beneath stone. For seeds hidden in jars. For animals to return from far grazing. For sickness to pass by the doors. For the wind to move around the village and not through it. For the dunes to remain where they were. This is how the ritual made sense inside the legend. It gathered every fear into one act. And that is why it was powerful. Not because it was proven. Not because the desert truly required it. But because, when survival becomes uncertain, people often search for one action that can carry the weight of many fears. A bowl of grain cannot control the sky. A prayer cannot force a well to rise. A circle in sand cannot stop drought. And yet, to frighten people, ritual can feel like a way of touching the invisible machinery of the world. It can make chaos feel spoken to. It can make fear feel shared. It can make helplessness feel like duty. In the story, the 10 chosen people were wrapped in white. The narration must remain gentle here, as the legend itself should be handled with care. There are no harsh details. Only the image preserved in the old telling. 10 figures standing at dusk near the sand circles. White cloth moving softly around them. Clay bowls at their feet. Torches flickering in the dry air. The village behind them holding its breath. The desert before them endless and quiet. Some versions say they volunteered. Some say they were selected by omen. Some say the elders drew marked stones from a jar. Some say families offered names in secret when drought grew severe. Some say there were never 10 people at all, but 10 bundles, 10 symbolic figures, 10 offerings of grain and bone and cloth later misunderstood by travelers. This uncertainty matters. Because the story is not history written in stone. It is legend. It has changed with each mouth that carried it. And in that changing, the number 10 became fixed, almost ritual in itself. 10 for the wells. 10 for the winds. 10 for the dry months. 10 for the fingers that plant and harvest. 10 for a fullness that could be counted by human hands. Whether the number began as memory, symbol, or invention, it gave the legend its haunting shape. Each year, the sand demanded 10. But perhaps the truth beneath the legend was different. Perhaps there was a burial custom in which certain dead were wrapped in white and placed in dry sand with offerings, then later generations misunderstood the pattern. Perhaps the desert naturally preserved bodies so well that travelers, finding them centuries later, imagined a ritual more frightening than the reality. Perhaps drought years produced desperate movements, abandoned settlements, and burials at the edge of the dunes, and from these fragments the story of the sand god slowly formed. Or perhaps the legend expresses something more symbolic. Not 10 actual lives. But the feeling that every dry season demanded a portion of the tribe. A lost herd. A failed field. A family forced to leave. A well that did not recover. An elder who could not survive another year. A dream of abundance given back to dust. Sometimes a people may say lives were given to the desert because, in truth, the desert took something every year. The ritual continued in the story. The drum sounded. The elders prayed. The white cloth moved in the wind. The clay bowls were placed at the edge of the circle. Salt was poured into sand. Milk touched the ground. Seeds were buried where nothing could grow. And the people watched. They watched the sky for clouds. They watched the wells for rising water. They watched each other for signs of doubt. Because belief is never only between people and gods. It is also between people and one another. If everyone believes, the ritual becomes a shelter. If many doubt, the shelter begins to crack. Yet in a hard year, even doubt can become quiet. A person may question the elders by day and still bring an offering at dusk. A person may whisper that the sand is only sand, then wake in the night afraid of wind at the door. A person may believe nothing until a child grows hungry or a well turns dry. Then belief becomes less like certainty and more like need. This is why the legend feels ancient. Because it understands that fear can make sacred things stronger. The dry season deepened. Night after night, the tribe repeated small acts of devotion. White cloth tied to thorn branches. Ashes sprinkled at thresholds. Bowls placed near the wells. Songs sung toward the dunes after sunset. Hands pressed into cool sand beneath the moon. And always, beyond the village, the ritual circle waited. It waited through the last light. Through the low drums. Through the wind that erased footprints almost as soon as they were made. The wind is important in this story. It is the desert's hand. It covers what people leave behind. A footprint. A spilled offering. A line drawn in sand. A tear that falls and dries before morning. By dawn, the ritual place would look almost untouched. The torches burned out. The bowls half filled with sand. The cloth quiet. The circle softened. And beyond it, the dunes smooth again. As if nothing had happened. Or as if the desert had accepted everything. The tribe would return to ordinary life. That is perhaps the strangest part. After the ritual, the water still had to be carried. Animals still had to be fed. Fields still had to be tended. Tools still had to be repaired. Children still had to sleep. Bread still had to be made. The world did not become holy forever. It became ordinary again, but an ordinary life placed under the shadow of what had been done to preserve it. If rain came later, the people would remember the ritual. They would say the sand god had listened. If the wells rose, even a little, the elders would be honored. If the fields gave grain, every stalk might feel like proof. And if nothing improved, the explanation could always deepen. Perhaps the offering had been too late. Perhaps the god was still hungry. Perhaps someone had broken a rule. Perhaps the balance had been wounded in a way no one understood. This is one of the dangers of belief under pressure. It can comfort. It can unite. It can give meaning. But it can also become impossible to disprove. Every event can be folded into it. Rain proves the god is pleased. Drought proves the god demands more reverence. Survival proves the ritual worked. Suffering proves it must continue. And so, year after year, the story says the tribe returned to the sand. Not always with the same fear. Not always with the same certainty. But with the same need to believe that the desert could be negotiated with. Over time, the ritual became part of identity. The children who had once watched from behind their parents grew into adults who swept the circles themselves. The young who had trembled at the drums became elders who spoke the names of wells. The first shock faded into tradition. The tradition became law. The law became sacred. And what had once been a desperate answer to drought became the center of how the tribe understood the world. They were the people who fed the sand. And because they fed the sand allowed them to live. This is the story told by the legend. But beneath it, we can hear another story. A story about drought. About fragile settlements at the edge of survival. About bodies preserved by dry earth. About outsiders misunderstanding what they found. About how the human mind turns climate into character, hunger into judgment, and landscape into God. The desert did not need to speak. It only needed to remain silent. Human beings filled the silence. They filled it with prayers, rules, offerings, warnings, names, and finally, with the figure of the sand god. As the years passed, the tribe began to change. Fields moved farther from the dunes. Wells were deepened. Some families left after dry seasons and did not return. Trade paths shifted. Travelers came less often. The old riverbed grew paler. The settlement became smaller, or perhaps only quieter. In the story, the elders still kept the ritual. But the world around it was weakening. A ritual can give meaning to hardship. It cannot always overcome it. If the climate turned harsher, if water sources failed, if trade routes moved, if younger families left for greener lands, then even the most sacred tradition would not hold a people forever. Eventually, the tribe vanished from living memory. No great battle is needed in this story. No sudden destruction. Only abandonment. One house left empty. Then another. A well covered. A field unplanted. A shrine half buried. A circle of sand no longer swept clean. The desert did what it always does. It waited. Wind entered the doorways. Sand gathered against walls. Roof beams fell. Clay bowls cracked. The boundary stones sank lower into the earth. The white cloth, if any remained, became dust. Years became centuries. The tribe became rumor. The rumor became legend. The legend became a warning told by travelers at night. They said that once, near the old dry riverbeds, there was a people who believed the sand was alive. They said that each year, the desert asked for 10. They said that when the tribe vanished, the sand god did not vanish with them. It simply returned to silence. And far beneath the dunes, wrapped in dry earth and time, the desert kept what had been given to it. Centuries passed, and the desert became smooth again. The houses fell into low shapes beneath the sand. The fields disappeared. The wells filled with dust. The paths that once led between shelters, storage rooms, and the old ritual circle became impossible to follow. Only the dunes remained. They moved in the slow way dunes move, not like waves seen in a storm, but like time made visible. Grain by grain, season by season, they covered walls, bowls, thresholds, fire pits, and every sign that people had once stood there looking toward the sky. The tribe vanished from memory. Or almost vanished. Because the desert does not forget in the same way people forget. It erases the surface, but sometimes it keeps what lies beneath. Many years later, travelers began to speak of strange finds beyond the old dry riverbeds. At first, the stories were small. A bead found in the sand after wind cleared a hollow. A broken clay bowl lying near a half-buried stone. A scrap of ancient cloth preserved in a place where no village was supposed to be. Then came the quieter discoveries. Wrapped remains beneath dry sand. Bodies preserved by the desert air, not as they had been in life, but as fragile human traces held by dryness, salt, and time. They were not found with horror in this telling. They were found with stillness. With lowered voices. With the careful hands of people who understood that every ancient body was once someone's whole world. Someone who had a name. Someone who belonged to a fire, a house, a well, a path, a story. Some were wrapped in worn cloth. Some lay near beads, small jars, shells, clay bowls, or simple offerings. Some were close to stones arranged in patterns that may have been intentional. Some appeared alone. Some in groups. And around them, the desert remained silent. For archaeologists, if such a site were real, the first task would not be to believe the legend or reject it too quickly. The first task would be patience. Where were the bodies placed? How were they wrapped? Were there signs of ordinary burial? Were the objects offerings, personal belongings, or later disturbances? Was the preservation natural? Did the dry sand, heat, salt, and lack of moisture protect organic material that would have vanished elsewhere? Were the patterns meaningful, or did wind and erosion create illusions? These are careful questions. They belong to evidence. They belong to science. They belong to the slow work of separating what can be known from what people wish to know. But legends do not wait for evidence. The old story returned. Travelers spoke by campfires. Guides lowered their voices near certain dunes. The strange preserved bodies became connected to the sand god, as if the desert had opened a small door in the present and allowed the past to breathe through it. Were these the 10? Were these the chosen? Were they offerings? Or were they simply the dead of a desert people, buried with care, later surrounded by a darker story? No answer came easily. The desert had kept them, but it had not explained them. Imagine one of those discoveries at dawn. The wind has blown all night, and by morning a shallow hollow has opened between two dunes. The light is soft, almost gray. A traveler walking near the old riverbed notices something pale at the edge of the sand. Not treasure. Not gold. Only cloth. Ancient cloth, dry and delicate, folded around a human form resting in the earth. Nearby lies a clay bowl, cracked but still holding its shape. A few beads are scattered like drops of dark water. A line of stones curves nearby, half hidden, half revealed. The traveler does not touch anything at first. The silence is too complete. The dunes rise on all sides. The sky brightens. And for a moment, the scene feels less like a discovery than an interruption. As if the present has stepped accidentally into the sleep of the dead. This is where the mystery deepens. Because desert preservation can be natural. In dry environments, bodies, textiles, wood, leather, food, and other fragile materials can sometimes survive for extraordinary lengths of time. Sand can bury quickly. Moisture may be scarce. Decay may slow. What would disappear in wet soil may remain in arid ground. This explanation is real and grounded. The desert can preserve without intention. It can keep a burial not because a god demanded it, but because the climate allowed it. And yet, natural preservation does not erase ritual. Ancient people everywhere cared for the dead in ways shaped by belief, kinship, fear, hope, and the need to keep relationship with those who had gone before. A wrapped body in dry sand may be an ordinary burial. A bead may be a personal ornament. A clay bowl may be food for the journey, an offering, or simply part of the person's life. A circle of stones may mark a grave. A group burial may reflect family, status, disease, migration, drought, or some event we can no longer reconstruct clearly. The facts may be quiet. The legend may be loud. And between them lies the mystery. The story of the sand god may have grown from real burials misunderstood by those who found them later. Imagine nomads crossing the region centuries after the tribe was gone. They find bodies preserved too well, faces of the past still held by the earth, cloth still wrapped, offerings still beside them. They do not have the old language. They do not know the burial customs. They do not know the names of the wells or the fields. So they ask what kind of people were buried this way. Someone says they were given to the sand. Someone else says the desert demanded them. Someone else adds the number 10. A story forms. Then another. Over time, respectful burial becomes ritual sacrifice in the imagination of strangers. This has happened often in human history. When people find customs they do not understand, they sometimes turn them into frightening stories. The unknown becomes dark because darkness is easier to imagine than complexity. But another possibility is softer and sadder. Perhaps the legend grew not from misunderstanding alone, but from drought memory. Perhaps there were years when many people died or were buried at the edge of the settlement because the land could not support them. Perhaps families marked graves in sand with white cloth, bowls, and prayers for rain. Perhaps each dry season took a number of lives, and over generations this became the idea that the desert required them. In such a case, the sand god would not be the cause of the deaths. It would be the name given to their pattern. The name given to fear. The name given to the yearly wound. Human beings often give names to forces too large to face directly. The sea becomes a goddess. The storm becomes a god. The river becomes a spirit. The mountain becomes an ancestor. The desert becomes a hunger beneath the dunes. This does not mean people were simple. It means they were human. They were trying to speak to powers that could not be commanded. Drought is difficult to pray to if it has no face. Hunger is difficult to fear if it is only a condition. But a god can be asked. A god can be appeased. A god can be blamed. A god can be remembered. The sand god may have been less a being beneath the earth than a language for living near the edge of survival. A way to say the desert is stronger than us. A way to say the well may fail. A way to say the fields do not grow because we wish them to. A way to say life is borrowed here, and must be treated with reverence. Still, the preserved bodies remain. In the legend, they are what gives the story its weight. Without them, the sand god would be only a tale told in wind. With them, the tale begins to feel anchored. But anchoring is not proof. An ancient body beneath sand proves that someone lived and died there. Cloth proves care. Beads prove adornment. Pottery proves human hands. A pattern may prove ritual, or burial, or simply the arrangement left by people who loved and feared in ways we can no longer fully read. It does not prove the desert demanded 10 lives. It does not prove the legend happened exactly as told. Evidence can open a door. It does not always show the whole room. Imagine archaeologists kneeling near the site in the quiet heat of morning. They brush sand away slowly. They do not rush. Every layer matters. Every object is mapped. A bead is lifted. A fragment of cloth is recorded. A bowl is photographed in place. The line of stones is measured. Beyond them, the dunes shine in pale gold. No one speaks much. There is a kind of reverence in careful work. The goal is not to make the dead mysterious for entertainment. The goal is to let them be understood as much as possible, and respected where understanding fails. The people beneath the sand were not symbols first. They were people first. Only later did story gather around them. This is important. Because legends can turn human lives into shadows. The sand god may dominate the tale, but the bodies, if they existed, would belong to individuals. People who ate bread or grain. People who carried water. People who knew the names of family members. People who looked at the same stars we see. People who may have sung at night, feared drought, loved the smell of rain, and watched the dunes as both danger and beauty. To speak of them softly is to return a little humanity to what the legend made strange. And yet, the legend survives because it asks a question that archaeology alone cannot answer. What happens to a community when nature feels like a will? When drought comes again and again, when water disappears, when food fails, when the wind erases labor and tracks and even graves, people may begin to feel that the land is not passive. It seems to respond. To punish. To withhold. To remember. The desert becomes a presence. And a presence requires relationship. Perhaps the tribe, real or imagined, developed rituals not to harm, but to survive fear together. Perhaps the offerings were symbolic at first: seeds, milk, salt, cloth, clay bowls, prayers, songs, names spoken into dusk. Perhaps the number 10 belonged to a calendar, a cycle, a counting of months, wells, winds, or families. Perhaps only much later did the story become darker. Or perhaps, in very desperate times, beliefs can lead people to choices that later ages find difficult to understand. We do not need to decide too quickly. The sleep mystery lives in the space between possibilities. Legend. Memory. Misunderstanding. Burial. Drought. Ritual. Preservation. Fear. All lying together beneath the same sand. As the centuries move on, the finds become stories, and the stories become warnings. People say not to camp too close to the old dunes. They say the wind still counts. They say the sand god sleeps under the hill of pale sand where the cloth was found. They say if you walk there at night, your footprints vanish behind you faster than they should. These are not facts. They are the kind of details legends grow in order to protect themselves from being forgotten. Every mystery gathers imagery. Every old fear seeks a shape. The desert gives many shapes. A dune like a sleeping back. A wind that sounds like breath. A dry well that seems to look upward from the earth. A circle of stones half buried. A bowl filled with sand instead of water. A cloth moving where no hand touches it. Such images do not prove anything. But they explain why the legend endured. It felt true to the landscape. The sand god belonged to the desert because the desert already behaved like a god in human imagination. Vast. Silent. Beautiful. Unforgiving. Generous after rain. Terrible in drought. Able to hide a whole settlement and return a single bead centuries later. In the end, perhaps the most responsible answer is also the most haunting. The sand god may not have lived beneath the dunes. There may have been no literal deity waiting under the sand. No annual demand spoken by the earth. No certainty that 10 lives were ever offered in the way the legend claims. But the fear was real. The drought was real. The dependence on water was real. The fragility of fields at the desert edge was real. The bodies preserved by dryness, if found, would be real. The human need to explain loss would be real. And sometimes, that is how a god is born in memory. Not from a miracle. But from repeated fear. From the same wind arriving every dry season. From the same well sinking lower. From the same fields cracking open. From the same question whispered beside small fires at night. What does the desert want from us? Maybe the desert wanted nothing. Maybe it was only earth, heat, wind, and time. Maybe it did not demand lives. Maybe desperate people believed it did because believing gave shape to fear, and fear without shape is sometimes too heavy to carry. Or maybe the legend is telling us something even more subtle. Not that the desert demanded human lives. But that every harsh landscape asks something of the people who live there. Attention. Humility. Memory. Restraint. Reverence. The desert asks people to remember that water is precious. That hunger is never far away. That a field is a gift, not a guarantee. That a path can vanish by morning. That no settlement, however beloved, is stronger than the forces around it forever. If the tribe existed, perhaps this was their deepest wisdom, hidden beneath the darker form of the tale. They knew the desert could not be conquered. Only listened to. And so, in the final image of the story, we return to the dunes. The sun has gone down. The heat has lifted from the sand. A pale moon rises over the old dry riverbed. Wind moves softly across the empty land, passing over buried walls, forgotten wells, broken pottery, and the place where the sand circles may once have been. No drums sound now. No torches burn. No elders speak the names of water. Only the desert remains. It lifts the sand grain by grain. It covers the footprints of a traveler. It smooths the edge of a stone. It enters the cracks of a clay bowl and fills it with dust. Somewhere below, perhaps, there are still beads, cloth, bones, and unanswered questions resting in the cool darkness of the earth. The legend says the sand god kept what was given. History says the desert preserves what conditions allow. Interpretation says fear can become ritual. Imagination says the wind still remembers. And between all of them, the mystery lies quiet beneath the dunes. Maybe there was never a god under the sand. Maybe there was only drought, hunger, silence, and the human need to believe that even the most terrifying forces could be spoken to. But when night falls over the desert, and the dunes turn silver beneath the moon, it is easy to understand why someone, long ago, might have listened to the wind and thought it was answering. The footprints fade. The old village sleeps. The desert becomes smooth again. And beneath the sand, the question remains.